They told me it would be impossible, that a man with a business, a family, and zero experience with heavy machinery had no business trying to build a house with his own two hands, let alone in the mountains, 12 miles from the nearest paved road. But they didn't understand what this place meant to me. This wasn't just some cabin-in-the-woods fantasy. It was the culmination of a dream I'd carried since I was a boy, climbing trees with a hammer in my tool belt, and a dog-eared copy of Off-Grid Living tucked in my backpack. In 2017, after nearly a decade of restoring old Victorians and forgotten craftsman homes for other people, I bought my own slice of wild heaven. 12 acres of steep, cedar-covered land in the Clark County mountains, untouched by utility lines or zoning nightmares. It wasn't cheap, and it sure as hell wasn't convenient. No driveway, no running water, no reception. But when I stood at the edge of the bluff and looked out over that jagged canyon, I knew I'd found it. The place. No HOA, no gates, just dirt, sky, and silence. I didn't hire contractors, didn't call in favors. I did what I've always done. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. The first summer, I cleared brush and leveled the slope with a rented skid steer I barely knew how to operate. I hauled gravel by hand, set rebar with my son, and mixed concrete with a rusted cement mixer that screamed like a dying walrus. I slept in a tent with my wife and 2 kids while coyotes howled in the dark and raccoons tried to rob us blind. We had blisters, sunburn, and exactly 1 functioning camp stove between us. But every cut beam, every bolt, every stubborn nail that bent sideways 3 times before it went in, that was ours. We earned every inch. By year 3, the frame stood like a skeleton rising out of the rocks. I built the walls from salvaged cedar, aged and scarred like it had always belonged there. We spent entire weekends forging balcony rails in my shop back in Ridgefield, then hauling them up the switchbacks one by one, swearing every time we thought we'd lose a piece to the ravine. It was slow, agonizing progress. Weather stalled us. Injuries delayed us. There were weeks we couldn't make the drive up at all, but we kept coming back. Last summer, we got the solar panels running. After years of candles, propane, and a small generator that sounded like it ran on angry bees, we finally had light. Warm, quiet, beautiful light. My daughter cried when the lights turned on in her room for the first time. And me? I didn't say a word. I just stood outside, staring at the roofline silhouetted against the stars, and felt the kind of satisfaction that doesn't need language. This spring, everything finally felt like it was coming together. We'd installed the windows, sanded the floors, and hung the last section of reclaimed redwood siding I'd saved for 6 years. My wife joked it looked like a mountain museum, but I knew what she meant. Every detail had intention. This wasn't a house. It was a statement, and it was almost done. That morning, I was finishing the final coats on the upper deck posts. I had music playing from a Bluetooth speaker, and the smell of fresh cedar stain in the air when I heard tires crunching over gravel where no tires should be. I frowned. The only way in was a narrow fire road I had personally chained off. I hadn't heard the chain. 4 vehicles crept up the trail, late-model SUVs with spotless paint and bright orange vests visible through the windshields. They parked like they owned the place, nose to nose with my pile of stacked stone. Before I could even say anything, 4 people stepped out, 3 men, 1 woman, all wearing reflective vests with the words Highland Peaks HOA embroidered in navy blue. The woman had short blonde hair, sharp sunglasses, and a clipboard thick enough to kill a raccoon. She walked right up my drive like she'd done it 1,000 times. "You must be Mr. Calloway," she said, flipping through her papers like she was looking for a recipe. Karen Larson, Community Director, Highland Peaks. I didn't shake her hand. You're about 6 years late to welcome me to the neighborhood. She smiled like I'd just admitted I'd murdered her cat. Actually, this is no longer considered unincorporated land. Your parcel falls within the fire protection buffer zone and expanded perimeter of Highland Peaks as of August 2022. I squinted at her, hands still stained with varnish. What the hell are you talking about? She turned the clipboard toward me. A map, sleek, digital, brightly highlighted in pastel zoning blocks, marked my lot as part of a newly extended community overlay. The edge of my roof was barely inside the pink area. It looked like a joke. You're not listed as a registered member, she went on, flipping pages. Your architectural plans were never submitted to the Community Design Committee, and since no compliance exemption was filed before active construction began, this dwelling is considered an unapproved structure within Highland Peaks HOA. I laughed. I actually laughed. I'm not in your HOA. I bought this land outright. Title, deed, taxes, all filed 6 years ago. I've got paper records, digital scans, hell, I've got drone footage of me laying the damn foundation. Karen gave me a tight-lipped, almost sympathetic smile. I understand your confusion. Unfortunately, our development expanded legally with county approval. It's your responsibility as a property owner to remain informed of jurisdictional changes. She handed me an envelope. Inside, a notice of non-compliance, a list of violations ranging from unauthorized exterior finishes to failure to install HOA-approved mailbox fixture, and a deadline for removal or conversion of the structure. I stared at her. You think you can just walk in here 6 years after I bought this land and claim it? It's not about claiming, Mr. Calloway. It's about standards and protecting the value of our community. Her team fanned out across my property like ants. One guy took photos. Another unrolled what looked like a measuring tape. I didn't even know what the hell they were measuring. My patience, maybe. I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten, but I took out my phone, snapped a picture of her car, her clipboard, and her face. Leave, I said. Karen tilted her head. You should really consider cooperating. There's a process. We could work with you. There's an expedited path for conditional compliance. I smiled without humor. That sounds like extortion with extra paperwork. She shrugged. We'll be in touch. They left just as calmly as they came, their tires grinding down my slope like they'd already marked it as theirs. And I stood on my own damn land, jaw clenched, knuckles white around the envelope, wondering how the hell a dream 6 years in the making could suddenly be flagged for demolition by people I'd never even heard of. The envelope sat on my workbench all night, next to a half-finished spindle I was carving for the stair rail. I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I knew what was coming. I'd seen this kind of move before, back when I helped an elderly couple in Tacoma fight off a developer trying to rezone their street one parcel at a time. Same trick, different hills. This was legal chess, and Karen had just made the opening move. Next morning, I drove down to the Ridgefield town office with a manila folder thick enough to snap a filing cabinet. Tax receipts from 2017 to the present. My original survey maps. The title transfer. A notarized affidavit confirming the lot was zoned residential rural with 0 HOA attachment at the time of purchase. I didn't come in hot. I came in precise. The clerk, a guy named Jeff, who looked like he'd rather be in Alaska, gave me a tight smile and pulled up the current GIS map. My stomach dropped. According to the county records, my parcel now showed a weird pink overlay over the western third, right under my bedroom and half the main structure, labeled Highland Peaks Buffer Zone. Does this mean they own it? I asked, keeping my voice flat. No, Jeff said, tapping the screen. "It's still titled to you, but it is flagged under the community overlay. They filed a zone extension about 18 months ago. It went through the Planning Commission. Without my consent. They don't need it for buffer zones. Technically, it's not a seizure. It just means any development inside the overlay might be subject to adjacent community regulations. Emphasis on might. It's one of those gray area things." "Right," I muttered. "Gray like concrete." I left that office with more questions than I came in with. On my drive back up the mountain, I stopped for diesel and hot coffee and replayed everything Karen had said the day before. The smile, the clipboard, the legalese wrapped in that saccharine concern. It wasn't just about control. It was about leverage. And I knew damn well what came next. It showed up in my mailbox 3 days later. An invitation to voluntary integration. Glossy trifold pamphlet, complete with smiling families, lush green lawns, and a suspiciously fake-looking deer caught mid-gallop in the background. Inside was the pitch. A limited-time pathway to community recognition for legacy properties within the Highland Peaks expansion area. If I accepted, I'd get conditional compliance. A 1-year grace period to adapt my structure to HOA aesthetic standards, and limited exemption from some retroactive architectural reviews. Translation: "We'll stop trying to bury you if you kneel." The back page had a deadline, 30 days, and a highlighted footnote. Failure to respond may result in formal enforcement procedures, including but not limited to property access restrictions, legal claims of non-compliance, and civil penalty. Assessments. I stared at it for a long time. Then I burned the damn thing in my wood stove. 2 days later, they came back. This time, it wasn't Karen. It was a liaison named Travis, a man in his early 30s with waxed eyebrows, shiny shoes, and the same fake concern smeared across his face like dollar store cologne. He parked his hybrid SUV at the edge of my retaining wall and walked up with a little leather folder like he was trying to sell me a timeshare. "Mr. Calloway," he said, beaming, "my name's Travis. I'm with Highland Peaks Community Relations Office. Karen asked me to reach out personally and see if you had any questions about the voluntary pathway." "I've got one," I said, not looking up from the post I was chiseling. "You people always this persistent with land you don't own?" Travis chuckled. "We like to think of it as proactive. We really want to avoid conflict. That's why we're offering you a direct channel to compliance, with some flexibility built in. You've done great work up here. Nobody wants to tear it down." I raised an eyebrow. But our architectural committee is firm on certain structural codes, and unapproved developments, especially those within the buffer, pose a liability to the community. Fire risk, environmental impact, even resale values. You can understand how it looks. I wiped my hands on a rag. I understand how it looks. Like a shakedown with paperwork. He gave me a pained smile. "We just want you to feel like part of something bigger." "I already am," I said. "It's called owning my own damn land." He sighed. "Well, I'll leave this with you." He set a second packet on the rail. Same pamphlet, this time with my name printed on the cover and a line for signature. I didn't touch it. "Let me save you a trip. I'm not signing anything. You come up here again without a court order, I'll file trespass. That clear enough?" Travis nodded slowly. "Karen was hoping you'd be more cooperative." "Tell Karen I'm real cooperative with people who stay the hell off my property." He got back in his SUV, still smiling, and drove off like he'd just finished a successful delivery. Like they thought I'd cave. That's the part that stuck with me. They didn't expect a fight. They expected fatigue. Most people don't sue. Most people fold. That's what they counted on. And that's what pissed me off the most. I don't consider myself paranoid. But there's a particular flavor of dread that hits when you realize the world is slowly shifting underneath you. Without permission, without warning. It's like waking up to find someone's rotated your house 10 degrees overnight. Everything looks familiar, but nothing feels right. By week 2, the unease had settled into something sharper. Suspicion. The map they'd shown me, the one with my property sliced neatly into their buffer zone, didn't just look off, it was off. Not in theory, not in interpretation, in measurements. The angles were wrong. The southern tree line curved where it should have run straight. I know every inch of this land. I've stepped it, measured it, laid foundations on it. That line was a lie. I drove back down to the county office and asked for a copy of the most recent plat maps and GIS overlays for my parcel. The clerk, a woman named Angie with a voice like bubble wrap, pulled it up without hesitation. She even printed it for me. "You're looking at the Highland expansion map," she said cheerfully. "That update went through last March. Fire buffer designation." "Was there a public hearing?" She squinted. "Not for overlays like this. Technically, it was internal. HOA brought it to the planning committee for wildfire mitigation purposes. I asked to see the minutes." She hesitated, then brought me to a terminal where public meeting logs were archived. I scrolled back to March. There it was. Proposal for Highland Peaks Community Buffer Zone Expansion. What caught my eye wasn't the content. It was the attendance. Karen Larson was listed as both community director and project consultant. That alone wasn't illegal. But what followed was the kicker. A brief line reading, "Preliminary rezoning consideration for Phase 2 of Creekside View development." Creekside View? I'd never heard of it. But the name made my skin crawl. I filed a public records request for any development filings connected to that name. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. Inside, architectural mock-ups, proposed lot divisions, and promotional materials, full color, polished to hell. A future luxury community. An elevated lifestyle in the clouds, it said. 40 homes, yoga terrace, hiking access, panoramic vista clubhouse. It took me a minute before I realized where the panoramic vista was supposed to be. My ridge. My house. Front and center in their damn brochure. Airbrushed out. Replaced with a sleek glass infinity deck and a quote from some imaginary family about morning lattes above the fog line. That's when it clicked. They weren't trying to protect the environment. They weren't trying to enforce design standards. They were trying to clear the bluff. My bluff. And I was in the way. I took a long walk after that. Just me, the ridge, and the truth. They'd moved my property line in the database, not through legal acquisition, but through strategic overlay manipulation. The digital map didn't match the official survey I had from 2017. They'd done a quiet lateral shift, about 60 feet east, just enough to make the heart of my structure sit on their claimed jurisdiction. A false intrusion to justify real control. I returned to the county office the next day with my original stamped survey in hand. Angie looked at it, then looked at the screen, then back at the paper. "Huh," she said. "That's strange. These coordinates don't match the current parcel configuration." "Because someone altered it," I said. She went pale. "Well, I mean, the maps are updated routinely for administrative purposes, sometimes to adjust for environmental concerns or planning compatibility." "With whose permission?" "I couldn't say. That'd be above my level." I didn't shout. But I did ask for a full printout of all GIS edits made to my parcel since January of last year. She told me I'd need to submit another request. So I did. That night I stayed up reading through the Creekside View proposal again, Buried in the appendices were notes from internal HOA strategy sessions. I could tell they hadn't expected these to go public. One bullet point hit like a brick. Acquire bluff lots through overlay enforcement. Push compliance or initiate quiet title recovery. Prioritize elevation sites for premium view access. Minimize public resistance by framing as fire mitigation. Quiet title recovery. It wasn't just ambition. It was a goddamn blueprint for theft. I scanned every page, made backups, sent copies to a lawyer friend from Seattle who once took down a crooked land trust in Pierce County. He called me 10 minutes later, cursing so loud I had to put the phone on speaker. "This is straight-up fraud," he said. "They're baiting you into default so they can force arbitration. That buffer is just lipstick on a hostile land grab." I didn't sleep much that night either, but I didn't feel helpless anymore. Because now, finally, I knew what the hell I was fighting. The morning they brought the sheriff, I was painting trim on the south-facing windows. I had earbuds in, music going, nothing dramatic. Just me, a brush, and the hum of progress. I didn't hear the vehicles until the crunch of gravel stopped right at the edge of my driveway. 2 sheriff's deputies. Not the kind that stroll up with friendly warnings. They had posture. Behind them, Karen Larson again, dressed like she'd just come from a TED Talk on tyranny, holding a thick folder like it was a sword she couldn't wait to swing. "Mr. Calloway," the taller deputy said, hand resting on his belt, "we need to speak with you about an occupancy issue." I pulled out my earbuds. "Occupancy issue?" Karen stepped forward, all fake sympathy. "It's about safety, Eric. We've received several complaints that you and your family are inhabiting an unapproved structure inside HOA territory. Without proper inspections, without insurance. You're putting yourselves, and potentially others, at risk." I pointed at my title document, tacked to the inside of the front window like a damn protest banner. "I own this land outright. I'm not part of your HOA, and we haven't occupied anything. We're finishing construction. On my property." She offered that tight, bureaucratic smile again. "Unfortunately, as of the updated overlay, you are partially within the Highland Peaks community perimeter, which means your presence here, without compliance, is considered unlawful occupancy. The HOA's legal team has authorized notice of voluntary vacation." She handed me a letter, heavy cream stock, gold seal. Looked like an invitation to prom. The deputy cleared his throat. "We're not here to arrest anyone, sir. But this notice advises that you vacate within 72 hours to avoid civil penalties. If there's a dispute, we advise you to pursue it through the appropriate channels." "And what channel do you suggest?" I asked, voice flat. "The HOA's complaint hotline?" No response. They left without incident, but Karen lingered just long enough to lean in and whisper, "We're still willing to work with you, Eric, but the window is closing." That night, I contacted the county building department. I wanted to make sure my permits were all up to date. Surprise! Someone had submitted an anonymous complaint. According to the file, I was being investigated for unlicensed structural development, violation of local fire code, no sprinkler system, excessive clearing of protected flora, threat to adjacent community water flow. It read like a wish list of ways to shut me down. I asked the clerk who submitted it. She couldn't say. Anonymous. But attached was a supplemental packet. Photos of my house taken from an elevated angle. Drone footage. I hadn't flown my drone in weeks. The next day, it got worse. I received an email from the Washington Department of Ecology. Subject line, Urgent, Pending Environmental Review. Someone had filed a complaint stating that my construction activity had disturbed potential nesting sites for Buteo regalis, the ferruginous hawk, a protected species in the state. Attached was a 2-page letter from Green Cliffs Conservation Group, signed by a woman named Brenda Sloan. She claimed to have observed tree removal and noise pollution detrimental to the hawk's migration path and demanded a cease and desist until a full review could be conducted. I stared at her signature. Something about the name rang a bell. I checked the HOA documents I'd pulled during my research. There she was, Brenda Sloan, registered as a contracted environmental impact consultant for Highland Peaks HOA. I dug deeper. She wasn't just a contractor. She was Karen's cousin. Of course she was. I sent the packet to my lawyer. He laughed so hard I thought he might break a rib. "This isn't environmental activism," he said. "This is eco-warfare. It's a fake complaint dressed in granola. You're being boxed in from every angle." The following week, I was hit with everything all at once. A formal summons to appear before the Building Commission for compliance violations. A preliminary fine estimate, $125,000 for unpermitted development, and another notice from the HOA claiming they would assume temporary stewardship of the property in the interest of community stabilization. It was like a bureaucratic airstrike. They weren't waiting for me to break. They were trying to drown me in paperwork until I disappeared. There's a moment in every fight when the panic burns off and something colder settles in. Calculation. Rage turns to fuel. Fear sharpens. You stop reacting, and you start engineering. After the summons, the fake environmental hit job, and Karen's little stewardship stunt, I knew I was out of time. They wanted to overwhelm me, drown me in forms, notices, inspections, a paper chokehold. But paper works both ways. I started with the truth. My truth. I dusted off 6 years' worth of photos, time-stamped videos, drone flyovers, everything from day one. The raw, muddy foundation to the last cedar plank I hammered into the gable. I uploaded it all, every blistered hand, every sunrise over frost-covered lumber, every inch of proof that this house was earned, not stolen. I narrated it in one long, honest voiceover and posted it to YouTube. Built by hand. How HOA tyranny tried to erase my home. Then I broke it down into smaller clips. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook groups for off-grid builders, and HOA horror stories. I added text overlays, tagged local journalists, even made a Google Drive of all my legal documents and linked it in the bio. The reaction was instant. One post hit 200,000 views in a day. Comments rolled in by the hundreds. People sharing their own HOA nightmares. Strangers offering legal resources. Even one former Highland Peaks resident who said Karen once fined her for hanging non-compliant wind chimes. My inbox exploded. News outlets started calling. A Portland freelancer asked if he could hike up and do a piece on the house. I said yes, and made damn sure he brought a camera. But social media alone wouldn't save me. That's when I called Mabel Lewis. Mabel is a land use attorney out of Seattle with a reputation for ruining smug developer dreams. She's the kind of lawyer who speaks softly but files lawsuits like artillery shells. We'd met years back on a historic preservation case. When I told her what was happening, she didn't even hesitate. "Email me everything," she said, "and don't say another word to them. Not even hello." Within 48 hours, she had a dossier thicker than a phone book. And within 72, she'd already found the crack. The HOA's buffer zone, not properly recorded with the state assessor. More specifically, they'd failed to register the expanded area as a taxable jurisdiction, which meant, legally, they couldn't enforce compliance, levy fines, or claim governance over the new territory unless they paid back taxes and filed as a governing body with revenue obligations. In short, they were trespassing on paper. Mabel filed a complaint with the Washington State Department of Revenue, requesting an audit of Highland Peak's zone filing. At the same time, she drafted a cease and desist for any further community enforcement actions on my property. They had tried to bury me in bureaucracy. I just turned it into a shovel. By the end of the week, I had a letter from the Department of Revenue confirming that the Highland Peaks HOA's jurisdictional expansion was pending review for tax compliance. Translation: if they wanted to keep pushing, they'd have to pay up. Tens of thousands in back taxes, public scrutiny, and worse, precedent. It wasn't a final blow, but it was the first time I saw them flinch. The dominoes started falling faster than I expected. 2 weeks after Mabel sent that complaint to the Department of Revenue, a reporter from Channel 6 showed up on my property with a drone, a camera crew, and a grin like he'd just uncovered Watergate with a view. Turns out, the story had grown legs. My footage, the Creekside View documents, the tax angle, it all made for the perfect media cocktail. He did a full 10-minute segment titled, "Who Owns the Ridge?" 3 days later, the emails started flooding county inboxes. Activists, landowners, retired lawyers, even a few pissed-off HOA members who thought they'd been duped. Everyone wanted to know how a private organization could redraw lines in silence and threaten to take someone's home. The Clark County Prosecutor's Office announced a preliminary inquiry into Highland Peaks. That's when things got real. Mabel got access to HOA's internal filings, don't ask how, and uncovered exactly what we'd suspected. Karen had been operating with near total control. Most board members hadn't even seen the full Creekside View proposal. Turns out, she and a local GIS consultant named Doug Penner had submitted falsified parcel documents for adjustment during a supposed fire risk mitigation update. Doug, of course, turned out to be her brother-in-law. It didn't stop there. Included in the records was a folder, actual scanned PDFs containing signed voluntary inclusion agreements from nearby landowners. Except 2 of them were dead. One had sold their land years before. The signatures were forged. Karen had been manufacturing consent. All of this hit the DA's office like gasoline on an open flame. They moved fast. Faster than I thought possible. The morning she was arrested, I was pressure washing the lower deck. I heard the cars before I saw them. Black sedans, one marked cruiser. No vests this time, no clipboards, just business. They pulled up to the HOA office, one of those fancy converted farmhouses with quartz countertops and leased art on the walls. She came out smug, probably expecting to charm them. That changed when the detective read the charges out loud. Fraudulent misrepresentation, attempted unlawful property seizure, falsification of public records, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Her smile died somewhere around. Felony. One of the HOA board members, a guy named Marshall, gave a short interview that afternoon. Said he felt manipulated, betrayed, and deeply concerned. I didn't blame him. Karen had used the board like a front, like a mask. Within 48 hours, a judge issued a temporary injunction freezing all HOA actions tied to the expansion overlay. Within 72, Highland Peaks HOA was under formal investigation by both the state's Department of Real Estate and the Attorney General's office. The final nail? Doug Penner turned state's witness. He handed over everything: emails, draft maps, financial transactions. There was even a voice memo where Karen described my house as a temporary obstacle in the development timeline. Obstacle. Not homeowner. Not human being. Obstacle. That was when I knew she hadn't just overstepped. She'd built her empire on sand and thought no one would notice when the tide rolled in. The courtroom was small, not the kind of place where history gets made. Fluorescent lights, mismatched chairs, a judge who looked like he'd rather be fishing. But when the verdict came down, it might as well have echoed across the whole damn mountain. The HOA was dissolved. Karen Larson was sentenced to 6 years in state prison for fraud, document falsification, and attempted property theft. Doug Penner got a lighter sentence for cooperation, but was barred from working in land services for life. A few board members resigned mid-hearing. One cried, "Not for me," probably for their reputations. The judge's tone was dry, but the words were thunder. This case demonstrates an egregious abuse of private governance structures and a blatant disregard for property law. The court recognizes Mr. Calloway's unbroken legal title and condemns all actions taken against him. Then came the part I didn't expect: compensation, not just a symbolic amount. The court awarded me $490,000 for legal fees, emotional distress, material delays, and attempted unlawful seizure. It was the first time I'd heard the number and felt nothing but quiet relief. No celebration, just air in the lungs again. After the ruling, I returned to the ridge. Alone this time. The house stood exactly as I left it. Solid, scarred, but unshaken. I walked every room slowly. The smell of cedar, the echo off the beams. I touched the railing we'd forged by hand, and finally let myself believe. It was over. I got to work immediately. The last fixtures, the security system, the final stain on the front steps. I installed a weather station, added a second solar array, and, because irony is delicious, built a small observation tower right above the bluff, facing where Karen once wanted her clubhouse to go. A few months later, I held a small open house, not a party, more like a reckoning. Friends, reporters, even some former HOA members showed up. I printed out Karen's old map and pinned it to a board titled "How to Lose Everything." Underneath it, I mounted my original deed in a steel frame. No glass, just raw paper behind wire mesh. On the gate, I hung a new sign. This is private land. This house was built by hand. Trespassers will be educated. Freedom lives here. People laughed, took pictures. One older guy said it gave him hope. But I wasn't done. In the months that followed, I launched a statewide coalition, Citizens Against Forced HOA Expansion. We started small: forums, Zoom calls, a website where people could report illegal overlays and pressure tactics. Within weeks, we had stories from all over Washington, Oregon, even California. It turns out what happened to me wasn't an anomaly. It was a tactic. I testified in front of the state Senate later that year. Brought my story, my documents, my voice. Lawmakers asked questions. One even quoted a line from my video. I built a house, not a battlefield. In the end, we helped draft a bill, the Private Property Protection Act, that would make unauthorized jurisdictional expansion a felony and require full public notification and opt-in signatures for any HOA boundary changes. It passed by a landslide. The house is quiet now. My kids call it the fortress. My wife still calls it madness made out of wood. But I catch her smiling every time we light the fireplace. Last week, I watched the sunrise from the tower. Coffee, silence. That same canyon I saw 8 years ago, untouched by glass railings or developers' fantasies. I didn't just win a legal fight. I got my home back. And this time, I don't plan on giving up a single inch.